Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It was a Tuesday night, nothing dramatic. Just the two of us sitting across from each other at the kitchen table, plates half full, wine glasses sweating in the summer air. She wasn't angry. She wasn't crying. She wasn't even raising her voice. That made it worse. She looked at me as casually as if she were commenting on the weather and said, "I regret every day with you." The words didn't echo, they sank. They cut deeper because she said them with calm conviction, no heat, no hesitation. My hand froze halfway to the glass. I studied her face, waiting for a smirk, some sign it was a cruel joke. But there was nothing, just indifference. For a moment, the silence stretched, heavy enough to drown in. And then something inside me snapped, not in anger, not in despair, but in clarity. I pulled the ring from my finger, the band that had once symbolized a promise she clearly no longer cared about. I tossed it onto the table, the small metal clink louder than any scream could have been. I looked her in the eyes and said, "Then let this be the last one." Her fork slipped from her hand, clattering against the plate. For the first time in a long time, she looked rattled. Not guilty, not apologetic, just caught off guard by the fact that I hadn't begged, hadn't argued, hadn't tried to fight for something already dead. I stood up, placed my napkin neatly on the table, and walked out of the room. I didn't slam doors. I didn't shout. I went upstairs, opened the drawer where I had kept all the little reminders of us, photos, ticket stubs, anniversary cards, and I closed it without touching a single thing. They no longer belonged to me. They belonged to a version of myself that had died the moment she spoke those words. That night, she didn't follow me upstairs. She stayed at the table, alone, staring at the ring lying between the plates. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling something shift inside me. It wasn't grief. It wasn't rage. It was release. The mini twist came the next morning. She acted as if nothing had happened. She brewed coffee, scrolled her iPhone, and hummed along to the same playlist she always played. No mention of the ring still sitting on the counter where I'd left it. No mention of the words she dropped like a blade into the center of our life. But the silence between us wasn't the same anymore. She thought it was her weapon. Now it was mine. The morning after, she moved through the house like nothing had happened. She poured coffee, checked her notifications, and hummed along to a song on Spotify while scrolling Amazon on her iPhone. The ring was still there on the counter, a small piece of metal that now carried the weight of a death certificate. She didn't mention it. She didn't mention her words. She just carried on, like I was supposed to forget. But forgetting wasn't an option. I didn't touch the coffee she poured for me. I grabbed my keys and walked out. No explanation, no goodbye. I drove to a diner we hadn't been to in years, one of those off-the-highway places with cracked leather booths and coffee that tasted like burnt toast. I ordered breakfast for one. The waitress asked if someone was joining me. I shook my head. That moment, simple as it was, hit me harder than anything she had said. We used to sit in these booths together, laughing over pancakes. Now I was there alone, and strangely, I felt lighter than I had in years. When I came home, she was already dressed, makeup carefully applied, scrolling through Instagram as if her life were picture perfect. She asked if I wanted to go out later, her tone casual, but her eyes searching. I didn't answer. I just walked past her, up the stairs, and shut the bedroom door behind me. For the first time, I let her sit with the silence she had earned. That evening, she cooked dinner, something she hadn't done in months. The table was set, candles flickering, the kind of effort that once would have pulled me back in. But I didn't give her the reaction she wanted. I sat down, ate in silence, and left the dishes where they were. Her fork paused halfway to her lips, waiting for me to say something. I didn't. The mini twist came when she tried to play it off to her friend over the phone. I passed by the kitchen and heard her whispering. "He's being distant, acting strange. Maybe he's just sulking." Her friend must have asked something sharp, because she added quickly, "No, I didn't mean what I said. It was just in the heat of the moment." I smiled to myself. There had been no heat. Her words had been cold, deliberate. And now, for the first time, she was the one trying to explain herself while I stayed silent. The balance had shifted, and she knew it. She thought silence was temporary, that eventually I'd crack, confront her, or at least demand an apology. But silence became my weapon. Every day, I withdrew a little more, and every day she noticed. Not at first, not in ways she would admit, but in the details she couldn't control. The way I stopped asking about her day. The way I walked past her in the hallway without a glance. The way I left my phone face up on the counter, not hiding anything, while hers buzzed constantly face down. The first week, I canceled the credit card we shared. I didn't announce it. I didn't explain. I just did it. A few days later, she stood in the kitchen holding the card, her voice sharp as she asked why it had been declined. I rinsed my coffee mug and said, "Maybe call the bank." Then I set the mug on the rack and walked out. No more words. That small move unsettled her more than any argument could have. For years, she had relied on me to manage everything quietly in the background. Now, for the first time, the background was gone. At night, she tried to close the distance. She'd sit beside me on the couch, brush her hand against mine, laugh too loudly at shows she didn't even watch. I never pulled away dramatically. I just didn't react. I let her sit there in her own awkwardness, realizing that the man she once dismissed as predictable had become unreadable. She hated that. The shift became visible to others. At a Sunday dinner with her parents, she tried to act normal, reaching for my arm as we walked in. I slipped past her, hands in my pockets, greeting her father before she even had the chance. Her mother watched closely, eyes narrowing, noticing what she didn't want them to see. Over dessert, her sister leaned in and asked if we were okay. I smiled politely and said, "Of course." Across the table, my wife's face tightened. She wanted to control the story, but I had left her with silence, and silence leaves room for others to fill in the blanks. The mini twist came that night when I heard her on the phone again, this time not with a friend, but with someone else. A man's voice, low and careful, slipped through the walls. I didn't burst in. I didn't accuse. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, letting the words wash over me like static. It didn't matter who he was. What mattered was that she finally revealed what I had already known. And now, she was the one living in fear of my silence. I didn't need to hear the full conversation to understand what it meant. The tone in her voice said enough. It wasn't business, it wasn't casual, and it wasn't new. She had already crossed the line long before I tossed that ring on the table. Still, I didn't confront her. I didn't demand names or explanations. I chose something colder. I decided to disappear from the life she had built around me without warning, without noise. The next morning, I left the house before she woke. I didn't leave a note, didn't answer her texts, didn't tell her where I was going. I turned off my phone and spent the entire day on my own. I walked through Costco just to feel the anonymity of a crowd. I sat in a coffee shop for hours, notebook open, jotting down nothing but random thoughts. I let her panic build in the silence. By the time I turned my phone back on that night, it was flooded with missed calls and messages. At home, she was pacing the living room, mascara smeared, her voice trembling when she asked where I had been. I shrugged, hung up my jacket, and went to bed without answering. The cracks spread quickly. She started overcompensating, making dinners she hadn't made in years, folding my laundry, even cleaning out the garage I had asked her to ignore for months. To anyone else, it might have looked like effort. To me, it was desperation. She wasn't doing it out of love. She was doing it to cover tracks, to repair an image she had already destroyed. One night, I came home later than usual. She was waiting, a glass of wine in her hand, asking if we could talk. I sat down across from her, arms folded, letting the silence stretch until she broke it. She said she wanted us to move forward, that she hadn't meant those words at the dinner table, that regret wasn't the right word. I listened without interruption, then stood up, poured myself water, and walked away. That was all. No argument. No forgiveness. The mini twist came the following weekend when a mutual friend pulled me aside at a barbecue. He asked quietly if everything was all right, because my wife had been confiding in his girlfriend. She had painted herself as the victim, telling people I had grown cold, detached, unloving. I smiled, told him we were fine, and walked away. That moment was sharper than any betrayal, because I knew the story she was trying to spin. But stories can't save you when silence has already exposed the truth. Her narrative might have fooled others, but it couldn't erase what had already shifted inside me. The man she remembered, the one who fixed her mistakes, carried the weight of her carelessness, and absorbed every cold word, was gone. In his place stood someone she didn't recognize, someone who no longer played by her rules. And that scared her more than any fight could have. I stopped doing the invisible things she relied on. I didn't refill her car's gas tank. I didn't schedule the house repairs. I didn't even bring in the packages from Amazon she left on the porch. One evening, she came home from work, her voice sharp as she asked why the boxes were still sitting outside. I looked at her, calm, and said, "They're yours." Then I went back to what I was doing. It wasn't neglect, it was precision. A reminder that every luxury she enjoyed had been propped up by a man she no longer respected. Her frustration turned into paranoia. She started checking my phone when I left it on the counter. She asked pointed questions about where I was going, who I was with, what time I'd be back. I gave her nothing more than vague answers. Out. With people. Later. The same ambiguity she had once used to keep me guessing was now turned back on her, and it ate at her in ways I didn't need to witness. The turning point came one Friday night. I got home late, my shirt still smelling faintly of smoke from the bar patio where I had been sitting alone for hours. She was waiting, pacing the living room, demanding to know where I had been. I set my keys on the counter, met her eyes, and said nothing. The silence stretched until she broke down, tears spilling, accusing me of things I hadn't even done. I let her speak. Every word exposed the truth, that she was terrified of losing something she thought would always be there. The mini twist revealed itself the next morning. She had posted a cryptic quote on Instagram. "Sometimes the quiet ones hurt you the most." Friends commented with sympathy, offering support she didn't deserve. But I didn't correct them. I didn't post a counterstory. I let her bury herself under the weight of her own performance. Because while she was busy curating an image online, the real collapse was happening in silence, right there in our home, where every empty space reminded her that she no longer held me. By then, her panic had become visible to everyone but her. She carried herself differently, no longer with the careless confidence of a woman who believed she was untouchable. Instead, she moved like someone waiting for a verdict. Her friends noticed it. Her family noticed it. And the more they asked questions, the quieter I became. I didn't have to tell the story, my silence told it for me. One evening, she tried to bridge the gap by planning a night out. She suggested dinner at Applebee's, a place we hadn't been in years. She dressed carefully, makeup flawless, her smile rehearsed. I drove, but the silence in the car was louder than the music on the radio. At the table, she leaned in, pretending to laugh at things I hadn't said, her hand brushing mine on the menu. I didn't pull away sharply. I just let the moment pass, like her touch meant nothing. And that was worse. Her smile faltered, her eyes darting around to see if anyone else noticed the shift. They did. Back home, she finally cracked. She stood in the doorway of our bedroom, arms crossed, asking if there was someone else. I looked at her calmly, steady, and said nothing. She repeated the question, her voice sharper this time, almost desperate. Still silence. She wanted a fight. She wanted tears. She wanted me to reassure her. Instead, I folded my shirt, placed it neatly in the drawer, and turned off the lamp. The sound of the switch echoed louder than any answer could have. The next morning, she tried a different tactic. She made breakfast, something elaborate she'd seen on TikTok, plating it like we were contestants on a cooking show. I came downstairs, poured myself coffee, and left the food untouched. She watched me the entire time, waiting for some reaction. I gave her none. When I left for work, the food was still sitting there, cold and untouched, just like the effort behind it. The mini twist came that afternoon when one of her closest friends texted me. She said she didn't want to interfere, but she thought I should know that my wife had been confiding in her, crying, panicking, saying I had become a stranger overnight. I thanked her politely and left it at that. I didn't need confirmation. I already knew. The woman who once told me she regretted every day with me was now drowning in the regret of her own making. And the cruelest part? I didn't need to punish her. She was doing it all by herself. Her desperation turned into overexposure. She started calling me at work, something she had never done before, asking meaningless questions just to test if I would answer. I kept my replies short, my tone steady, my patience cold. By the third call in a single day, I stopped picking up altogether. When I came home that night, she was waiting at the door, her smile stretched thin, asking if I had seen her calls. I hung my jacket on the chair, slipped off my shoes, and walked past her. No words, no explanation, just the echo of silence filling the space she had once dominated. That weekend, we were invited to a friend's barbecue. She insisted we go together, determined to prove that we were fine. I agreed, curious to watch her act unravel in front of an audience. At the party, she clung to me, laughing at every joke, introducing me with exaggerated affection. I let her perform, but I didn't play my part. When people asked how things were, I smiled politely, gave vague answers, and let the silence sit where her lies used to. Her friends noticed the imbalance, the forced laughter on her side, the calm detachment on mine. And the whispers started before the night was even over. Back at home, she exploded. For the first time in weeks, she raised her voice, demanding to know why I was humiliating her, why I wouldn't act normal, why I was trying to make her look bad in front of everyone. I sat down, poured myself a glass of water, and let her words spill into the air. When she finally stopped, breathless and shaking, I said one thing. I didn't make you look bad. You did that yourself. Then I walked upstairs, leaving her to crumble in the kitchen. The next morning, I noticed her frantically scrubbing the counters, rearranging cabinets, blasting music from Hulu in the background as if noise could drown out her panic. But no music could cover the truth. She was unraveling, and the silence I carried with me was crushing her faster than any scream ever could. The mini twist came later that day when her best friend texted me privately. She wrote, "I don't know what happened between you two, but she's not the same. She keeps saying she feels like she's losing everything." I stared at the message for a long time before closing it without replying. Because her friend was right. She wasn't the same, and neither was I. The difference was, I had found strength in the silence. She had only found fear. By the fourth week, the cracks in her mask had grown too wide to hide. She no longer carried herself with confidence. Even in public, her voice shook when she tried to speak for both of us. People noticed. They asked questions she couldn't answer, and I never stepped in to save her. I had spent years covering her mistakes, smoothing her edges, protecting the image she wanted the world to see. Now, I simply let the silence do the work. One evening, she begged me to go with her to Olive Garden, insisting it would be a reset. I agreed, not for her sake, but for mine. I wanted to watch the performance collapse in real time. At the restaurant, she leaned close, smiled too wide, held my hand across the table as if trying to prove something. But when the waiter arrived, her grip tightened, her voice cracked, and she realized I wasn't holding her hand back. I left it limp in hers, unresponsive, and the message landed harder than any spoken word could. Her smile faded, and the silence at that table became unbearable. For her, not me. Back home, she tried once more. She lit candles, poured wine, played the same old playlist we once called ours. She sat across from me, waiting, her eyes wet and searching. She whispered that she didn't mean what she had said, that people make mistakes, that words shouldn't carry so much weight. I watched her carefully, calmly, and then stood up without answering. I left her sitting there with her wine glass untouched. The flickering candlelight only made her loneliness more visible. By then, she had started confiding in people who weren't even her friends. I overheard her at Target, whispering into her phone in the parking lot, telling someone she thought I might leave her. Her voice cracked as she said she regretted saying what she had said to me, that she wished she could take it back. I walked past her, loaded my bag into the truck, and didn't even glance her way. Let her stew in the silence. The mini twist came when I received a message from her cousin that same night. He asked if I was okay, if I needed someone to talk to. He said she had been telling people she was afraid I didn't love her anymore. I didn't answer him either, because love wasn't the point anymore. Respect was. And when respect dies, silence becomes the only language left. By now, the silence had grown so heavy that it followed her everywhere. At work, her colleagues asked if everything was all right, because she no longer carried herself with the same careless bravado. She brushed them off with forced smiles, but I could see the way her shoulders tightened, the way her voice cracked when she said things were fine. The truth was leaking out in places she couldn't control, and I didn't need to push. I just needed to let it spread. One night, she finally broke. She stood in front of me in the living room, her voice trembling as she said she regretted her words, that she didn't mean them, that she wanted to start over. I didn't interrupt. I didn't argue. I sat back, let her speak until her voice ran dry, and then I got up, poured myself a glass of water, and walked upstairs without a word. That silence crushed her more than any cruel response ever could. She tried harder after that, texting me in the middle of the day with lines she thought sounded caring. "Hope you're having a good day. Miss you. Can't wait to see you tonight. I responded with one-word answers, if at all. The distance became unbearable for her, and I could see it in the way she lingered near me at home, waiting for me to ask questions I no longer cared to ask. The woman who once claimed to regret every day with me was now begging for the scraps of attention she had thrown away. At a family dinner, her unraveling became impossible to hide. Her father pulled me aside on the porch, asking if everything was all right, because he noticed she wasn't herself. Before I could answer, I saw her through the window, watching us, her expression tight with dread. I told him we were fine, shook his hand, and went back inside. Her eyes followed me like a cornered animal's, full of fear she couldn't mask anymore. The mini twist came later that night, when I overheard her on the phone in the bathroom. She wasn't whispering to a friend this time. She was crying to her mother, saying she thought I was planning to leave. Her voice cracked as she said, "He doesn't fight. He doesn't shout. He just disappears." I stood in the hallway, listening, calm and steady. Because she was right. I wasn't fighting anymore. I was gone already, and the silence was all the proof she needed. The final moment came quietly, without an argument, without a storm. It was a Sunday afternoon, the kind that used to mean grocery runs at Walmart and lazy evenings with Netflix. She walked into the living room holding the ring I had tossed onto the table weeks ago. Her hands trembled as she placed it on the coffee table in front of me. Her voice was barely a whisper as she said she wanted another chance, that she didn't mean what she had said, that she was scared of losing me. I stared at the ring for a long moment, the metal catching the light, a reminder of vows she had already broken. Then I looked at her. She was crying, but I saw no regret in her tears, only fear. Fear of losing comfort, fear of being alone, fear of living with the consequences of her own cruelty. That was when I understood the truth. She didn't want me back. She wanted the safety I provided, and safety was something she would never have again. I stood, leaving the ring untouched on the table. I walked upstairs, opened the closet, and pulled out the last bag I had packed in silence. It had been waiting there for weeks, ready for this exact moment. She followed me up, her voice breaking, asking if this was really it. I zipped the bag shut and said nothing. Silence was my answer. Carrying the bag past her, I walked down the stairs, past the photos on the wall, past the memories that no longer held weight. She stood frozen at the top of the staircase, clutching the railing like it could hold her together. At the door, I paused, turned once, and looked at her one final time. Calm, cold, unshaken. And then I said it. "You told me you regretted every day with me. I'm just making sure you never have to regret another." I walked out, the door closing softly behind me. No slam, no chaos. Just the quiet end of a life she had taken for granted. I loaded the bag into my truck, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The mini twist, the last one, was simple. A week later, her best friend reached out to me. Not to accuse, not to defend her, but to confess. She said she had known about the affair, that she had tried to warn her, that she wasn't surprised I had finally left. She ended the message with one line I'll never forget. "She thought you'd always stay. She never realized silence meant you were already gone." And in that moment, I knew the story was finished. Not with anger, not with revenge, but with silence, the only ending it ever needed. Real men don't explode. They exit. Subscribe for more power stories.